أين ملثو قدرد موفيو أدينت كتلة علينا وموريدا عسقو يدبي ملثو فشطو مضعرينا أدينو رابط كتلة علينا.
Hello! Although the fire starter for today's information will be the topic of the shape of the earth, actually that will take us to much deeper aspects of reality recognition. So you don't have to be interested in this internet fashionable discussion about the shape of the earth to find this video meaningful and useful. So the source of the Slavic Vedic information is again Alexander Paramonov. See the links in the description about who he is. So I've made few videos with information from him, and in the English version people will kind of get the impression that himself is the source of that knowledge, and that is ultimately true. But if you listen to the Russian originals, he is after every few words supporting everything he says with quotes from the Slavic Vedas. So that's where we are gonna reach. But let's start with this question which they have been asking him very often: is the earth flat or round, according to the Slavic Vedas? He explained that when people try to delve into matters of physics, or at least modern people, they have a very limited understanding of what physics is, and that limits their scope in understanding the shape of the earth as well. Because in reality, he said, the earth is both flat and round according to the perceiver. Those who consider that it is round, they will find proofs based on physics in their favor. There are people who also consider that it is some sort of special cube. They will also find their confirmations with certain experiments. And those who bet that it is flat, they will also find their proofs in what most people would call tangible physics, just because physics is more like Phasics. Phasics would be a more correct word, because according to the phase of the development of a certain being, its scope is correspondingly narrow or wide. For example, we know from modern experiments that particles behave differently when the observer changes. And actually that is valid for the entire three-dimensional reality around us. It also changes. The physical laws will change according to the observer or group of observers, which with their energy, because everything runs from this energy emanating from the souls of the living beings who use different kinds of patterns to maintain all kinds of physical realities around them. And those who wish to know the earth in its entirety, they will have to develop their consciousness to higher phases of understanding physics and everything else, instead of conducting more and more experiments within the realm of what we call physics, which is only one of the phases of physics. So what I covered in the Survivors of Atlantis and Hyperborea documentary was that there were Hindu Vedas and Slavic Vedas. However, most people are not even aware about the Slavic Vedas because they have been much more heavily suppressed by the parasitic filtering of information. Not only the name of the books is the same, the Slavic Vedas call themselves Vedas, and the Vedas in Hindustan have the same old name. Also the original old scripts which were used to write the originals centuries ago, they were also very similar. The philosophy is basically the same. And now that I started listening to Paramonov, who quotes the Slavic Vedas constantly, I'm also shocked of how much the words match as well. Like, for example, what astonished me most is that the main word in both Hindu Vedic terms and Slavic for the benevolent gods, as opposed to those of darkness, is Sura. Ra is not the name of some minor Egyptian deity. as they have been trying to deceive us, but this is one of the prime names of the Supreme Lord, all that is. And the Vedic counterpart is, of course, Lord Ram, again one of the prime names used for the Supreme Lord. Jiv in the Vedic paradigm is a living being, a soul. And it is the same word, Jiv, is also used in the Slavic languages. Nowadays it is mostly used as adjective, but there are uses as a noun as well, the very same word. And before we see what these parallels mean in practical terms, let's see one more parallel in terms of the shape of the earth. Of course, Bhumi Devi or Prithvi, the earth, is mentioned many times in the Vedas, and by far in the majority of the cases the earth is referred as being round or concave. All Pandits agree on this point. But that is not always. In other cases, the word tala is used. On the old carvings of the Hindu temples, we see either round or concave earths. So there are many mentions of Bhumi Devi, but there is one main description of its shape, geometry, and the sizes of the different islands and oceans. And in that passage, the earth is clearly called Gol. Gol means a ball. It is actually the prime word for a ball. It is also used in modern Hindi. There is no doubt about that. And then in that very same passage, when they elaborate on the form, they say it is similar to a lotus. This is how lotus flowers look like. And yet in many other passages it is compared to all kinds of concave objects. And that's why we have like two primary shapes for the earth in the Hindu Vedic context, the ball and the concave. And although we don't have like a graphic depictions of flat earth, sometimes words like Bhutala are used. Now, tala, even in modern Hindi, tala is like a plate, something flat. But it also has the meaning of a plane, what we call in plane in English, but plane like, for example, the earthly plane or the terrestrial plane in an abstract sense, not necessarily in physical, because everybody will agree, yes, I live on the earthly plane, I don't live in the ghostly plane or the astral plane. But on the other side, such a person might be convinced that he lives on a round shaped earth. So exactly as plane has different meanings in English, it has those same in Sanskrit as well, amongst many others. Mandala is also used very often in describing the shape of the earth in the Vedas. But mandalas can be like drawn flat on the earth, or they can be also three-dimensional. That doesn't necessarily specify a physical form, at least in the sense most people invest in that term. But mandala is very, very often used, and what it actually means is all these combined sacred geometric patterns which manifest our reality. And I think that is just another way of saying what Paramonov explained from a Slavic Vedic point of view, that the basis, the real earth, are the divine patterns from which all the realities manifest. And there is no wonder that we have different earths mentioned in the Vedas. Most likely we are talking exactly about different perspectives of the one and same thing. Now, something else which I think it's very important, much more important than the modern arguments of is the earth round or flat, is that we have an entire earthly belt of planets. Paramonov mentioned it. He also specified that we are the main earth. It is most definitely elaborated on in the Vedas. And actually, when they talk about this tala, I think in most of the cases they mean the earthly belt of planets, all the earths, the conglomeration of all the earths, because in the overall Vedic cosmology, these different planetary belts, they're stacked on the top of one another, and they're depicted as something flat indeed. And since the names of the earth, which are quite numerous in Indian Vedic context, they can be used when our particular earth is meant, or the entire earthly belt is under question. So there can be some confusion sometimes what they mean by earth. In the Seth channel material by Jane Roberts, he also talks about these groups of similar planets, concept identical to that of the planetary belts in the Vedas. And my personal suggestions to all those who invest lots of energy in trying to find out the shape of the earth is to try to realize with spiritual practices, try to perceive the entire planetary belt of different earths. That could be really worthwhile, because by developing that type of vision for other dimensions, so many other truths will open in front of such a person. Now, a deliberate misinformation regarding the true origins of the beliefs of the ancient people is not as minor as it may seem. This is what they officially want us to believe in terms of followers of the different religions. Of course, it is all fake, because the numbers of the populations of all countries are anyway fake. But still, at least some sort of ratio, even that is wrong. And that also plays a role in how the modern people identify themselves. They want us to believe that Christianity is most popular. Actually, most of the Christians included in that number have never read the Bible and don't believe even in the most famous and simple teaching of the Bible. Don't do to others what you don't want to experience yourself. And that's exactly why they create this illusion that the Christianity is more popular than it actually is. I'm gonna tell you the true history of Christianity now. And the same story, exactly and precisely, is in the channeled material by Jane Roberts, and also from Paramonov, as it comes from the Slavic side. So Christ was the last incarnation of God as such, which we had. And the case that he came some around 1,000 years ago is getting stronger and stronger. Seth says that the 2000 estimate is quite wrong, and Paramonov says that he came right in the very beginning of this dark age of 1008 years. So he also basically gives this date of 1000 years, as I have been making the case earlier in the Survivors documentary based on the New Chronology project. And by the way, Seth also indirectly endorses that number of 1000, because Seth also says that Christ came right in the beginning of the dark period, while at the same time he also hints that the duration of this dark period is 1000 years. So the new chronology seems to be more and more valid. One point that is only in the Seth books is that actually when the Christ figure came 1000 years ago, and also when he's here now, because of the immense power of his entity and the special quality of his soul being incarnation of the Lord, a single human body is unable to take upon all the energy he would need to accomplish his task. And that's why even when he came 1000 years ago, he came as three separate people, which would hold different aspects of his energy. And Seth explained that that's why they are kind of contradictory story about his life, because actually they're trying to combine the earthly lives of three different people. And indeed, we seem to have two different stories. One of them is the son of a carpenter, the other one is a king who rules his kingdom. That was for the first advent of Christ, and Seth explains that the second one will be the same. There will be one main figure which the people will recognize as Christ, as a being, human being, but there will be two others as well, which will be not as famous, but they will hold that divine energy, so that there will be this kind of stability, because when you have something supported by 3 points, it is stable. And then the both sources about the life of Christ, they confirm that what the actual Christ was teaching at that time was the message of love, and it was in this Vedic context of the old and true belief as given to the people by the lords, because the Vedas are not just an earthly phenomena. They are given in different poetic forms throughout the time on Earth and on other planets. The Vedas, they are the sound representation of the Lord, of his creative code. Those sacred sounds of the Vedas, they are the original source of the benevolent creative patterns. This is very easy to understand with these practical examples. You can find videos on YouTube of huge drums. They have small particles on them, and then they play different sounds, different frequencies. And these sounds, actually, they move the particles, and the patterns which appear are the sacred geometry which corresponds to that frequency. So that is how the entire creation is manifested. That is also in the Hindu Vedas. In the beginning, it is the Vedas, it is the sound. And then all these more gross elements, they appear, but they are moved, they are powered by the original ideas which are transmitted through that sound, and they take different forms according to the different combinations of sound. So the Vedas are very important, and Christ, he brought to the people that very same message of the Vedas. And by the way, I've seen mainstream documentaries many years ago when they find the really old scrolls, and they are asking the people who are actually reading them, what is it there? And they say, well, it sounds like some sort of New Age writing. It does not resemble the modern Christianity. Why did they use the term New Age? Because the modern New Age religion was actually initially inspired by the ideas of the books of Jane Roberts. They were given again by pure source, Seth, which he made to prepare us for the upcoming changes. And at the time that material was channeled, Seth also explained that the Jesus in his second coming just got born some 40 years ago, very roughly. That is not precise. And he also explained that this time Jesus will come again as three figures. One or two of them already have appeared, but the main one appeared at the time he was writing his books. And it is not a coincidence, because during the first advent of Christ, Seth at that time had an incarnation on earth, and his job was to make a decoration for like cart animals who pull carts. That was kind of respected creative job at that time. Maybe it looks a bit gross to us, but situation changes with time. And since the second coming of Christ on earth is also an extremely important cosmic event, Seth incarnated again during these times again as Jane Roberts. So back to the first advent. In the beginning, the people who actually met Christ, they benefited from his pure message, but then the organized religion, organized by the dark forces, they decided, no, from now on we're gonna make it like a brand, and they actually used the good name of Christ to spread their lies. They actually had groups of people who would go to the houses of the people in the Slavic world and take off all their images of their ancestors from which they were getting their power, because the Hyperborean lineage, the power comes from the ancestors, which give this ancestral memory. And by taking away the images of their ancestor, they cut off the connection of the people with them and substituted them with all kinds of scenes of violence, disturbing, bloody scenes, which focus the energy on people, on negativity, pain, and war, instead of the original teachings of love. Not only that, but they embarked on killing all the witches. What a negative word. The actual Slavic word for witch is vedma. Ma, well, it's a well-known, almost international word for mother, like Durga Ma, Ma Durga, Mother Durga. So Vedma, these were the mothers who spoke the Vedas. So their project of misusing the name of Christ worked very well, and that's why they wanted to appear on the top of the list, although it should not be there. Because despite all their perversions, what here is listed as Hinduism, and it actually should be called Sanatana Dharma, that is how the Vedic teachings call themselves, that should be at the top, because they have separated the Hinduism from Sikhism and Jainism, the Jain religion, also from India, which are so similar. They are more similar with each other than Christian sects are similar to each other, but yet, for the purpose of divide and conquer and diminishing the popularity of Sanatana Dharma, they have chopped it up. Also, part streams of the Buddhism, they are definitely with Vedic roots, like the Tibetan Buddhism was basically a branch of the Hinduism. Padmasambhava, he was an Indian yogi who went on a mission of Tibet. And by far all the so-called Buddhists in Southeast Asia, they don't even fit the mainstream definition of Buddhists. They are more suitable for this, what they call animism, and also shamanism, which was very recently recognized by their official institutions as a separate religion, but of course they forgot to include it here because they are too busy infecting people. And by the way, although Zoroastrianism may sound like something quite different, in reality they are very, very close. No, close is wrong. They are actually a relatively very pure and preserved form of the Sanatana Dharma, because they were told to keep everything secret, and kind of a pocket of a population preserved the old knowledge very, very well. And that's why a lot of endeavor has been invested in modern times to misinform the people in general what is actually the original religion of Iran. They had lots of agents, paid Western agents, preaching nonsense under the banner of old beliefs, organizing all kinds of internal betrayal. Once I spoke with actually a real Iranian person, and he was telling me, he said, I can't believe that in our era of information and communication, there can be such a vast gap between the reality of what people in Iran believe in terms of all the religion and what the people of all other countries think about that. It is a total mismatch. And the reason is that their old faith is very pure. So the true followers of the Sanatana Dharma, even today, are far more even than their concocted Christianity followers, because here from this table it should be actually the total of Hinduism, certain streams of Buddhism, some of what is called here ethnic religions, all of the Sikh people, what is called here Sikhism, many of those who are categorized as Spiritism people, most definitely all the Jain people, Jainism, and also some of the Animism people. This is only in terms of tampering with the number of followers of the different religions. In the Survivors documentary, I already spoke with how they tampered with the actual origins of the religions, because even as far as Southeast Asia and Japan, they most definitely and precisely worshipped the Vedic gods and nothing else. But this is not the general impression of a student of religion gets nowadays. It is all very much fragmented, and one is led to believe that the people of the various lands concocted all these gods out of sheer ignorance and the feeling of powerlessness in front of the forces of nature, which is radically opposite to the truth. Because all these religions which I listed, they have as origin actually the sound of the Vedas, and they came down from the times when people were much more powerful because they were in direct connection with the patterns of the forces of nature. They were using them as power banks. They could communicate with them. It is us, the modern men, who are only fearful in front of the elements. And most importantly, this dark demonic grid which has taken over the earth, all that is orchestrated by the god of darkness. And this god, of course, he has mystic powers. He knows the future. He knows that he will meet his end, his evil scheme on earth will be destroyed by the descendants of the Hyperborean gods, which are the Vedic gods and nobody else. So all this distortion of the general idea that people have about the Hyperborean, which is the Slavic gods, these are just desperate attempts to change the unavoidable fate of the dark grid, because it's the inherent nature of all parasitic living creatures. They desperately fight for life until the end, even when the end is unavoidable. The embodied beings who walk the godly path instead of parasitic, they also die, at least their embodied form, dress. But for them the experience of death is different. Usually they will know well ahead when it is coming, and they will simply go peacefully through the entire process. There will be as much tribulation as putting on new clothes, taking some rest, and then starting another learning lesson.
قدرة موفية ودينت كتلة علينا وموريدا عزقو يد بمثف شطو مضعرينا ودينو رابط كتلة علينا إلو مولي بوشحيقو وماكيخو مثو باسمتو كمينا هليلويا تشبحتو لعلوه على الطو ثيدد لفيلا هليلويا عمم مالاخي ديش مايو لومورو ديش مايو ديارو كمينا شبحينا لعلوه بلليو بيمومو زمرينا وشميدة بسكو ثيدا ندلك لويو هو خبلكي قدرينا المضعرينا وموريدا ومشمعينا لأقو ليدا قوم كرسيدا وما زهو